Thank you very much for the introduction. I hope you can hear me okay. We've got some slight connection issues today, so we will hopefully get through it. Great, thank you. Thanks for confirming. Brilliant. So we've only got about 25 minutes for this session, so I'm going to dive in with questions, but I wanted to just first give a little bit of context for our listeners. So Fernando Scodro is a third-generation member of the Brazilian family business, the Grupo Mabel, a confectionery business. He is deeply involved now in the impact investing strategy of the family office, Grupo Baobá, and he's on the board of The Impact. So that's The Impact with a capital P, a network of families that are aiming to do impact investing more effectively. He's also a fellow at the Center of Sustainable Finance and Private Wealth of the University of Zurich. And he's currently based in Singapore, but has lived in loads of different places all over the world. Easier than listing all the places that you've lived. And finally, you're in your early 30s, which I mention just because that is the topic of today's conversation, which is all about how people of your age, of your generation, are influencing the older generation. So, Fernando, your family are quite recent converts to impact investing, and you've had a big part to play in that. Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened?
Sure. And first of all, thank you for having me here today and for giving me the opportunity to share a bit my story. I hope it's quite helpful for some of you. So we converted to impact investing. It's a funny way of saying it, but I guess it's one of those things you have to convert into it, because my father has run the business for the longest time with his father, and they've always employed, the do well towards your staff, do well towards the city that you're in, do well towards the community that you're involved in. But that has always been like an unconscious behavior, well, very conscious behavior, but just in the subconscious. That's just how you do business, right? Mm-hmm. But then after we kind of sold a bit some of the family companies, we became investors and not just business operators. And when you become investors, there's a funny thing that happens. You suddenly only care about total return of your portfolio. There's a magic number. It's usually a percentage number that you seek for, right? Mm-hmm. And they call it alpha, and you have to get it. But then you suddenly forgot every other piece of value that you used to have in your company while you ran it. And I took a course at Harvard University, which today is given in conjunction with the University of Zurich, where I'm a fellow at. And the course was called Impact Investing for the Next Generation. And at that course, they gave us I saw the light. Let's put it that way. Let's use let's keep with the metaphor here. And I learned that there's a way to reflect the family values into the portfolio. So we converted in the sense that we operate a business on values, but now we can also do our investing with these same values.
Mm-hmm. And what prompted you to take that course?
So I was invited by a network called the Young Investors Organization, mm-hmm. and the Young Investors Organization is a network of young investors, as the name says, and we're always trying to do something together and always trying to find better ways of doing it. And the organizer of the Harvard course, Professor Falco Petzold, one of the four, he approached the organization, and I was invited to join it. It was a first iteration of the course that they were doing, so it was an invite that I couldn't refuse.
Mm-hmm. So you took that course. I think you were in your late 20s at that time. Came out the other side, and you were sticking with the metaphor. You were converted to this sort of idea, and you brought it to your family and said, "We've got to do this." How did they react?
It was, at first, they were very confused. Because it is a new concept. It was a new concept for us. It's still a very new concept for everyone to be kind of aware of what it is. At the time, my family was also starting to feel comfortable about being investors. So one of the first things that I noticed was that they weren't really familiar with the language or a lot of the terms and definitions. Right? We're from Brazil. I took the course in English. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things that don't necessarily translate. So the first thing that I did was I had to translate the course into Portuguese, because that made it a lot easier for them to understand what impact investing was and what I wanted to do with the family portfolio. So I think that was a good first step that I did in order to get everybody in the same level of knowledge.
And this was you yourself doing the translation, like literally translating every.
Correct. I took 6 months worth of coursework and I translated it. It was a lot of a lot of work.
A good way to embed what you learned, I guess.
Exactly. Because I had to read it, process it, and then I'll put it in a different language. So
yeah. And so there you are in your late 20s saying, we got to change what we do. I read a previous interview where you said, it took a while, and as hot-blooded Brazilians, there was maybe a lot of screaming. Is that still how you remember that phase?
So it was more, heated arguments than screaming.
Yeah.
And I say heated arguments because there's always that level of friction to a new idea, right? And I think that when I stopped and I understood that what was required of me was not, they weren't questioning my decision, right? They just wanted me to have more basis on which to bring this idea. So, I became a member of the Impact. I learned with other families. I joined the University of Zurich as a fellow. I learned with them as well. So I also had to kind of do a lot of homework so that when I brought these ideas a bit later in the process, I was mature about it as well. Because there's a lot of things that I didn't know, right? I also didn't know what was not possible. So I had to find out that I don't have a finance background. So it was important for me to learn what were the possibilities and the barriers of what I wanted to do.
Yeah. And what is the goal now of the family office in terms of impact?
Can you repeat that question?
What is the goal now of the family office?
So our goal is to have everything that we own somehow embedded with some values that we share as a family. And we have selected five topics that we want to see reflected in the family office. It's access to healthcare, access to education, climate change, gender equality, and better food. So all of the investments that our family have would necessarily have to be aligned to one of these topics, right? Within the limitations of the asset class, within the limitations for the financial performance of that asset class, because we also don't, it's not a charity, right? We're running a business. But I hope that everything that we have is aligned to those topics.
Okay. And some family offices and some investors will make a big thing about sort of, we're going to be 100% impact. Are you kind of on the way towards that? Is that the ultimate?
That's the ultimate goal. I don't like to make a big deal out of it because it's possible and it's not difficult. Different places in the world have different availabilities, right? So if you're European-based or American, you have a little bit more, there's a wider project range. You have more advisors to help you do that, right? In Brazil, where our investments are, and here in Singapore, I'm starting our own investment company here. The range of products is more limited, but that doesn't mean that it can't be done, right? There is with the same level of financial return, if not better. So I want to have 100%, but I don't think that I should be, lauded for it because it's fairly easy these days to do it.
Yeah. And when it comes to kind of making changes or making decisions, presumably there are financial advisors who have had to change their approach as well, or how does that relationship between you coming in with this sort of values impact idea and the advisors who were previously saying, it's all about maximizing returns, how has that conversation gone?
So that was also a steep learning curve for me, in the sense that we work with different banks, and we work with in-house advisors and external advisors, and I had to understand what drove them, right? What were their KPIs? What were their motivations? And the moment that you understand what are their motivations and their KPIs, and if you figure out a way to align those to what you want to do, then everything happens, right? If you don't manage to get them on board, it becomes very difficult because they are intermediaries, right? They make what you want possible. And it got to a point where 6 years ago when I first brought these concepts back to Brazil, they were very confused. And then we went back to the University of Zurich and say, hey, the same way that you are training next gens on how to do impact investing, you should also train the advisors on how to do impact investing. So today I help the University of Zurich with this training of the relationship managers, of the asset managers of both family offices and private banks, because the moment that the advisors and the clients speak the same language, that's when something can happen. But if you start discussing what impact investing is, then you surely know nothing's going to happen. You need to have the same definition. You need to start from the same basis of knowledge.
Yeah. So interesting that it's about the same language, literally the same language, Portuguese,
literally the same language,
but also the same, translating it in a sense as well. When it comes to kind of your financial strategy, do you do philanthropy as well, or is this all? Do you have kind of a separate philanthropic capital, or is everything about investing for a return?
Yeah, so there are a lot of, so if you take the traditional spectrum, right, we have the traditional investing and philanthropy at the other end, and then impact investing in its many shades fall in between. I do believe that a lot of things are not solved by impact investing, right? There's a few things that only philanthropy can address. And we've taken a strategy in our philanthropic portfolio about trying to potentialize our investment portfolio. So, I've become a co-founder of the Impact. I've donated to the University of Zurich. We've participated in some political activism in Brazil as well regarding the inclusion of young female politicians in ballots. So some of those issues are only solved by philanthropy. So we try to see, okay, within our 5 topics, what within them is only addressed by philanthropy and what can we address via investment. But philanthropy it should still be an important part of everyone's portfolio. It's just a matter of, if you do it smartly, you can potentialize your investment portfolio with the philanthropy.
You talked about some kind of political activism, and that's quite an interesting aspect of impact investing, but maybe philanthropy even more so, that kind of influencing role. Do you feel that as an impact investor, you have a role to influence the way things go? And does that sometimes get a little bit tricky, or maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable to be kind of stepping in as a wealthy family and potentially influencing the way things go?
It's always uncomfortable, but at the same time, it's our capital, right? It should behave as we ultimately, whatever decision that capital makes will reflect on us. So if I don't make sure that those investments that I agree with or I can stand by them, that's even more uncomfortable than asking, for example, my advisor to develop a climate policy for their voting policies within their funds, right? I rather turn to my advisor and say, hey, use the money that I have to vote according to my beliefs, rather than later I find out that I bought stocks in a company that encourage natural disasters or things like that, right? I think that's it's more uncomfortable than asking for it.
Yeah, so it's choose your discomfort, and that's the discomfort that you choose.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You have a younger, I believe she's younger sister.
Yeah.
And she's also involved in the family office. But has less of a sort of doesn't have a finance background and is less involved in that sort of aspect of it. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the role of someone like her who doesn't necessarily want, or isn't so keen to get really into the detail? How can someone like her still influence the family direction and the kind of impact approach?
Yeah, of course. I think that was the beauty of bringing these values aligned strategy to our portfolio, because at the time I was also not a part of the investment decisions. It was my father and the team. And the moment that we said that we wanted these values to be reflected in the portfolio, the values belong to the entire family, right? But maybe the decision belongs to 1 or 2 people, but everyone has a say on what values should be reflected. So I think that my mother, my sister, who are not part of the day-to-day decision making, they are now interested in what we're doing, right? They are now asking questions. They now want to be involved, but they want to be involved insofar as to, are we supporting things that we believe in? And it made the family dynamics and the family discussions around our business and our capital a lot easier, because suddenly there is a unifying aspect that everybody wants to see to fruition. So that was a beautiful part of it. Happened over the years, and it's going to get better over time. But the beginning of that has already started.
Are there still some heated discussions, as you put it?
There's always.
Okay. Normal family life.
But that's just because we love each other.
There's quite a lot of excitement about kind of next gen, as people call it, to kind of people like you sort of taking on, inheriting a lot of wealth and deciding to do something different with it. Do you think is that a bit overhyped, or do you genuinely think that that's kind of a massive, going to make a massive change? Do you see a lot of other people your age that are doing something similar?
No, I think that's going to be a massive change, but it's one of those slow-moving tides, right? Because a generational shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens over 8 years, over 10 years. And one of the first things, so in my role with the University of Zurich in training these advisors, I usually ask them, you have your clients, think of your client book, think of how many of your current clients' children have you spoken to, and maybe 1 or 2% have talked to the children, right? And the children are 30, 35, so they're not kids, right? Yeah. They are adults. They have their own careers already, but they're just not showing up to the meetings. And back in the day when I started this, a lot of them said, "Oh yeah, no, but none of my clients care about it." I'm like, "You're talking to the wrong people. You're 100% talking to the wrong people. And if you want to keep those future clients, you better get your act together now, because once they sit in the chair in front of you, then they will start asking questions about what you are doing for them, right?" And a lot of the older RMs don't care because they will be gone with the current generation really soon. But the younger RMs as well, you see that there's already a shift and a deeper understanding of that. So it's one of those slow-moving things, but it's inevitable in a way. I hope it's inevitable. It has to be inevitable.
We do. Yeah. Not much time. I mean, the younger generation, I guess, always challenges what the older generation did before. That's kind of how it works. But do you think there's something in particular with your generation? So people who live all over the world, digitally native, I don't know, experiencing a different world. Is there something about your particular generation that you think makes you well placed to kind of really get stuff done?
It's funny you say that this generation always complains about the older generation, right? And I already see my younger cousins using TikTok, and I'm like, "What the hell are you doing?" Yeah, and that's 100% true. But I think that with at my parents' time, the sense of urgency of some problems we have today didn't exist. They were aware of it. They had the luxury of not having to care about it a lot, right? And I think that my generation has a bit of the urgency, a lot more of the urgency than the current one had, right? And this is where I think that the problem lies. That's the different perception of urgencies. Whereas I see my younger cousins and my younger friends, they are 100% more urgent, right? Like they are even more stringent than I am, and you see this reflected in politics, right? Like the younger people are, the more loud they tend to be about the issues. It's just that we are now the ones taking over slowly the institutions, right? And if you see somewhere like Japan, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent. Like the next prime minister is still very old, right? Like Biden is still 70. So and even at the political level, this is changing, right? Like Prince Charles is 70, right? Like there's still a lot of people older than us waiting to be in charge. So I think that this will create a lot of problems, I find.
That's true. Yeah. How do you feel about being the older generation in, I don't know, 10 years time and being told by your younger cousins, you've got to catch up?
Oh man, when my godson called me uncle for the first time, I'm like, oh, I'm already too old.
just before we run out of time, I just want to ask you a little bit about your role at The Impact, which is sort of a non-profit that encourages wealthy families to do impact investing more effectively. I'm curious to know what are the so you spend a lot of time sort of talking to each other and learning a bit from each other. What kind of issues come up again and again, or what are the sort of questions that a lot of these families are concerned with right now?
Yeah, so I find that an organization like The Impact it plays a fairly important role for somebody like me, or for somebody who's working at a family office. It creates a space where we can share with our peers, strategies. We can share our concerns. We can share, how did you talk to your father? How did you convince your advisor? How did you approach your bank? Which bank are you using? How are they doing? How can I help you? How can you help me? Right. When I was building the alignment strategy for my family, I relied on a lot of the families from The Impact to help me. Right. Like what does a real estate impact strategy looks like? Right. Like what does so I think that kind of, and what does it look like in Germany versus in Brazil versus in the US versus in Japan, right? And there's it's a room for you to speak freely and to learn from somebody who has already done something similar to you. Yeah.
And I guess the cultural thing is obviously the impact investing landscape is different from one part of the world to the next, but perhaps just on this theme of next generation, the cultural thing must be a bit different. I imagine in countries and cultures where the older generation, has sort of must be respected, it must be even harder for younger people to come along and tell their parents to change the way they're doing things.
Yeah, a lot of times, so my friends here in Singapore, I tell them, like, look, Brazil is a lot like, Chinese culture and Japanese culture, but we're just louder than you guys are. But the whole hierarchy of, respect, this is the patriarch, he built the business, we respect him. That exists in both sides, and that becomes a bit of a tricky dynamics. And I think that this is where a network of like The Impact helps, right? Like I remember my father talking to other people his age that were in the network, and they told him what I was doing was cool. And then it was like, oh, wait, what my son's doing is cool? And I'm like, yes, I've been trying to tell you for 3 years, right? But then white hair needs to talk to white hair, and then they understand each other. But I think that it's a good way to help also the next gens get further along their agenda.
Yeah, these networks. So what would your advice be to an older sort of someone heading up a family office who's kind of curious about this, thinking about this, but a bit wary of kind of handing over control to the younger generation?
I'll tell them to talk to my dad. No, joking aside, I think that there is merit in listening to what this young generation is trying to say. But I myself also have learned that I need to be patient about what I want to accomplish and when I want to accomplish it, and also to be aware that if I want to get something done, I also need to get the credibility, right? So it's the working hard part of it that they insist on you doing, but we say, yes, I'm working hard as well, but I'm working hard, but I'm more impatient. So there is I think that communication of the, make sure to let them see that you're working hard, get the credibility that you need. But then once the next gen has that, acknowledge it, right? And give them a little bit of space.
Yeah. And just maybe to finish so that we're not totally bashing the older generation, the gray-haired people. I mean, you mentioned patience there, and are there other things that you think that I guess you have learned from the older generation that, stuff we need to make sure we bring into the new way of doing things and not just completely chuck it all away?
Yeah, so I'm not bashing the older generation. I think that there is this is something as well that is important, right? Because I also need to be cognizant of their accomplishments, right? And to be cognizant that they sacrificed a lot to get where they are. But I also want to have a say in this, right? So I think that the patience and the vigor, right? Because there's an energy that comes with a younger generation that somebody who's a chairman of something wants to be around that vigor of the younger generation. So it's a good way to strike a balance. And again, because all of the topics are revolved around family values, then it's a constructive conversation. Instead of being a destructive, you're not letting me do it, is a how can we, share all the values that we all have into this, right? It's your values too, my values, but it's your values too. So it becomes a joint effort rather than an opposing endeavor.
Yeah, a long-term kind of family discussion. Yeah, great, thank you. Thanks so much. I think unless there's anything else you wanted to add, Fernando, I think we'll.
Hello.